The dust swirled around Silver Creek Ranch in the Wyoming Territory during the summer of 1879. Margaret Whitmore, at 32, had built the most prosperous cattle operation in 3 counties from the struggling homestead her father left her. With auburn hair and emerald eyes, she commanded respect from ranch hands and territorial officials alike, wearing her success with practical authority and a Colt .45 on her hip. Among her 30 ranch hands was Thomas McKenna, a lean, weathered cowboy of 28 who had drifted in 3 years prior. What set Tom apart wasn't just his skill with cattle, but the silver harmonica he carried, an heirloom from his father and grandfather. In the evenings he would fill the prairie silence with haunting melodies that spoke of distant dreams. Margaret often found herself drawn to her bedroom window by those sweet, melancholy notes drifting from the bunkhouse. The music awakened something she had buried beneath years of hard decisions, a part that remembered dreaming of love rather than ledgers. Tom, equally aware of his beautiful employer, was fascinated by her combination of feminine grace and masculine authority. She could face down rustlers with the same calm she brought to balancing books, gentle a spooked horse, then deliver a tongue-lashing that left grown men ashamed. The attraction was mutual but unspoken. The social gulf between a wealthy ranch owner and a common cowhand seemed insurmountable. Margaret had declined marriage proposals from senators and cattle barons, claiming Silver Creek required her full attention. The truth was simpler. She had never met a man who could match her strength without diminishing it. Change came when Eastern investors arrived at Silver Creek. Harrison Blackwood, a silver-haired Chicago financier, led the delegation seeking to purchase large western tracts. With him were his lawyer, accountant, and his weak-chinned son, Edwin. Margaret politely declined their offer in her front parlor, explaining that Silver Creek was not for sale at any price. Blackwood grew cold when his usual tactics failed. He suggested Margaret might prefer marriage to managing such a burden, his eyes drifting meaningfully toward Edwin. Margaret's response was swift and cutting. She had not built Silver Creek to hand it over to some eastern dandy who wouldn't know a longhorn from a shorthorn. With casual cruelty, Blackwood mentioned rumors about evening serenades and inappropriate attachments to employees. Such behavior could damage her reputation, but marriage to Edwin would restore respectability. The threat was unmistakable: conform or face consequences. Margaret's voice was deadly quiet as she ordered them off her property immediately. As Blackwood departed, he warned that the territory was changing. A woman alone might find herself needing powerful friends, as business could become difficult for those who refused to be reasonable. Railroad routes could change, contracts cancelled, political influence withdrawn. After they left, Margaret felt truly vulnerable for the first time since her father's death. That evening, drawn by Tom's haunting harmonica as always, she made an unprecedented decision. Instead of watching from her porch, she walked down to join the ranch hands by their fire. The men were uncomfortable with this break in routine, but too polite to object. Margaret made small talk about the day's work while waiting for Tom to reach for his harmonica. When he finally played, she complimented his skill and asked about his musical background. Tom found himself sharing stories about his father and grandfather, both musicians who had played the same harmonica. As the evening progressed and other hands drifted away, Margaret and Tom found themselves alone by the dying fire. In the intimate atmosphere, Margaret thanked Tom for sharing his music, explaining how it filled a need for beauty in her daily life that she hadn't realized she had. Tom, modest as always, said music was meant to be shared, that his father taught him a song kept to oneself was only half a song. Margaret told him his music was indeed special, that she looked forward to it every evening. Taking a deep breath, she wondered if he might consider playing at the house sometime, perhaps after dinner, when she could listen more attentively. The invitation hung between them, loaded with implications both understood perfectly. Tom's careful answer showed his respect for their positions. He would be honored to play for her if she was certain it would be appropriate, mindful of his role as her employee. Margaret assured him it was what she wanted, and they arranged for him to come to the house the following evening. The next day passed agonizingly slowly for both. Margaret changed dresses 3 times before settling on elegant green silk that brought out her eyes. Tom bathed carefully and put on his cleanest shirt, though he worried his rough clothes would seem presumptuous in her grand home. That evening, Margaret welcomed Tom into her parlor, where she had arranged comfortable chairs near the fireplace. Despite the summer heat, she had built a small fire for ambiance. They talked easily about ranch business, but both felt the undercurrent of attraction flowing between them. When Margaret asked him to play, Tom began with a gentle ballad about a cowboy who loved a woman he could never have. The irony wasn't lost on him, but he played with all the skill and emotion he possessed. Margaret listened with closed eyes, her face showing concentration and pleasure. She asked for another song, then another, and Tom found himself playing as never before, the music flowing through him like water. As the evening progressed, they drew closer together. Margaret moved her chair nearer, and Tom played directly to her, watching her face for reactions. The formal distance between them dissolved, replaced by an intimacy both thrilling and terrifying. During a particularly poignant love song, Margaret found courage to speak her heart. When the last note faded, she looked into Tom's eyes and told him how much his music meant to her. But it was more than the music, it was the man himself, his kindness, integrity, quiet strength, and gentle spirit. She had been thinking about his words that music was meant to be shared, and she wondered if he might be willing to share more than just his songs. Tom's hands stilled on his harmonica as he processed her words. He had dreamed of this moment, but never dared believe it possible. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. He told her she was the finest woman he had ever known, that he had loved her from almost the first moment he saw her. But he was realistic about their situation. She was wealthy and influential, while he was just a drifting cowhand with nothing to offer but his devotion. Margaret's answer came swift and sure. She didn't care about social conventions or what others might think. She had spent years proving herself in a man's world and wasn't about to let narrow attitudes dictate her personal life. If Tom was willing to stand beside her and face whatever challenges might come, she was ready to face them too. Tom reached for her hands, marveling at their softness despite the calluses from hard work. He told her he loved her with every fiber of his being, that he would gladly spend his life protecting and cherishing her. But he warned her about the difficulties they would face: gossip, scandal, disapproval from people whose respect she had worked hard to earn. Margaret's answer was to lean forward and kiss him, a soft, sweet kiss that tasted of coffee and fulfilled dreams. When they broke apart, both breathless and stunned, Margaret told him she had never been more sure of anything in her life. The test came sooner than expected. 3 days later, Blackwood returned with a larger entourage and more aggressive approach. He had heard rumors about Margaret's scandalous conduct, entertaining employees in her home. Such behavior would shock decent society and undermine her position, making her vulnerable to those who questioned a woman's ability to run a large ranch. Margaret faced his accusations with icy calm, pointing out that what she did privately was her own business. But Blackwood was beyond social niceties. He made a final offer. He would purchase Silver Creek for half his original price, reflecting her newly compromised position. In return, he would ensure the rumors never spread beyond the immediate vicinity. Margaret was about to deliver a scathing rejection when Tom appeared in the parlor doorway. He had heard raised voices and come to investigate, fearing Margaret might be in trouble. His presence during a business meeting was highly irregular, but Tom was beyond caring about proprieties. Blackwood's eyes lit with malicious triumph. Here was the evidence he needed to complete Margaret's humiliation. He made a great show of recognizing Tom as a ranch hand, expressing mock surprise at finding him in the main house during business hours. Margaret felt the moment crystallize around her. She could deny Tom's importance, send him away, and try to salvage her reputation through conventional means. Or she could take a stand for love and independence, consequences be damned. Looking at Tom's weathered face and seeing the love and support in his eyes, her choice became clear. She rose with all the dignity of a queen and moved to stand beside Tom. In a voice that rang with conviction, she announced that Tom McKenna was not just her employee, but the man she intended to marry. He was worth a dozen Eastern financiers, and she was proud to claim him as her own. In the night before, about music being meant to be shared, and she wondered if he might be willing to share more than just his songs with her. Tom's hands stilled on his harmonica as he processed her words. He had dreamed of this moment, but had never dared to believe it might actually come to pass. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. He told her that she was the finest woman he had ever known, that he had loved her from almost the first moment he saw her. But he was also realistic about their situation. She was a wealthy ranch owner, a woman of substance and influence, while he was just a drifting cowhand with nothing to offer but his devotion. What kind of future could they possibly have together? Margaret's answer came swift and sure. She didn't care about social conventions or what other people might think. She had spent years proving herself in a man's world, and she wasn't about to let narrow-minded attitudes dictate her personal life. If Tom was willing to stand beside her, to face whatever challenges might come, then she was ready to face them too. She had money and land enough for both of them, but more importantly, she had love enough to last a lifetime. Tom set down his harmonica and reached for her hands, marveling at their softness despite the calluses that spoke of hard work. He told her that he loved her with every fiber of his being, that he would gladly spend his life protecting and cherishing her. But he also warned her about the difficulties they would face. There would be gossip and scandal, disapproval from the very people whose respect she had worked so hard to earn. Was she truly prepared for that? Margaret's answer was to lean forward and kiss him, a soft, sweet kiss that tasted of coffee and dreams fulfilled. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and slightly stunned by the magnitude of what had just occurred. Margaret told him that she had never been more sure of anything in her life. They would face the future together, whatever it might bring. What followed was a night of quiet conversation and gentle exploration, as two people who had admired each other from afar finally had the chance to truly know one another. They talked about their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future, and their memories of the past. Tom told Margaret about his years of wandering, always searching for something he couldn't name, but now realized had been her. Margaret shared her struggles to build Silver Creek Ranch, the loneliness that had haunted her success, and the joy she felt at finally finding someone who understood her dreams. As dawn approached, they made plans for their future together. Tom would continue working as a ranch hand for the time being, to avoid gossip and give people time to adjust to the idea of their relationship. But they would begin the process of getting to know each other properly, with an eye toward marriage when the time was right. Margaret felt a surge of hope that she hadn't experienced in years. With Tom beside her, she felt ready to face any challenge, including the threat posed by Harrison Blackwood and his syndicate. The test came sooner than expected. 3 days after that magical evening, Blackwood returned to Silver Creek Ranch, this time with a larger entourage and a more aggressive approach. He had heard rumors, he said with a sly smile, about Margaret's recent behavior. Apparently, she had been seen entertaining one of her employees in her home, a breach of propriety that would shock decent society. Such scandalous conduct would surely undermine her position in the community and make her vulnerable to those who questioned a woman's ability to run a large ranch operation. Margaret faced Blackwood's accusations with icy calm, neither confirming nor denying his implications. She pointed out that what she did in her private time was her own business, and that any man who spread gossip about a lady's conduct was no gentleman. But Blackwood was beyond such social niceties. He had come to make a final offer, one that he expected her to accept now that her reputation was in jeopardy. He would purchase Silver Creek Ranch for half his original offer, a sum that reflected her newly compromised position. In return, he would ensure that the rumors about her inappropriate relationship never spread beyond the immediate vicinity. The ultimatum was clear, and Margaret felt a surge of rage that almost overwhelmed her carefully maintained composure. This pompous Easterner thought he could blackmail her into selling her life's work, and all because she had dared to follow her heart. She was about to deliver a scathing rejection when Tom McKenna appeared in the doorway of the parlor. He had heard raised voices from the barn where he was working and had come to investigate, fearing that Margaret might be in some kind of trouble. His presence in the house during a business meeting was highly irregular, but Tom was beyond caring about proprieties. If Margaret needed support, he would provide it, regardless of the consequences. Blackwood's eyes lit up with malicious triumph as he saw Tom enter the room. Here was the evidence he needed to complete Margaret's humiliation. He made a great show of recognizing Tom as one of the ranch hands, expressing mock surprise at finding him in the main house during business hours. Surely Miss Whitmore could explain what one of her employees was doing in such an inappropriate place at such an inappropriate time. Margaret felt the moment crystallize around her. She could deny Tom's importance to her, could send him away and try to salvage her reputation through conventional means. Or she could take a stand for love and independence, consequences be damned. As she looked at Tom's weathered face, saw the love and support shining in his eyes, her choice became clear. She rose from her chair with all the dignity of a queen and moved to stand beside Tom. In a voice that rang with conviction, she announced that Tom McKenna was not just her employee, but the man she intended to marry. He was worth a dozen Eastern financiers, and she was proud to claim him as her own. If Blackwood found their relationship scandalous, that said more about his narrow mind than about their love. The room fell silent as the implications of Margaret's declaration sank in. Blackwood's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to outrage to calculating assessment. This was not the reaction he had expected, and he struggled to regain control of the situation. Finally, he managed a sneering laugh, suggesting that Margaret's judgment had clearly been compromised by her association with unsuitable company. A woman who would marry beneath her station was obviously unfit to manage a large business enterprise. It was then that Tom McKenna stepped forward, his quiet voice cutting through Blackwood's bluster like a knife through silk. He told the financier that he had heard enough insults directed at the finest woman in Wyoming territory. Margaret Whitmore was worth more than all of Blackwood's Eastern money could buy, and Tom would not stand by and listen to her being disparaged by a man who wasn't fit to clean her boots. Blackwood turned his attention to Tom with the kind of smile a cat might give a mouse. He suggested that the young cowboy was getting above himself, forgetting his proper place in the social order. Perhaps Tom should consider the consequences of his presumption, both for himself and for the woman he claimed to love. There were many ways that a man's life could become difficult on the frontier, and most of them were quite permanent. The threat was unmistakable, and Margaret felt a chill of fear for Tom's safety. But before she could speak, Tom's hand moved to rest on the butt of his gun, a casual gesture that nonetheless conveyed a world of meaning. His voice, when he spoke, was deadly quiet. He suggested that Mr. Blackwood might want to be more careful about making threats on Silver Creek Ranch. Tom had been dealing with dangerous situations long before he came to Wyoming, and he wasn't easily intimidated by city men who hired their violence done. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch as Blackwood realized that Tom McKenna was not the simple cowboy he had assumed. There was something in the younger man's eyes, a hardness that spoke of violence, seen and done, that made the financier reassess his position. For the first time since arriving at Silver Creek, Blackwood felt genuinely uncertain about the outcome of his visit. It was Margaret who broke the stalemate, her voice cutting through the electric atmosphere with characteristic decisiveness. She told Blackwood that he had 5 minutes to remove himself and his associates from her property before she set the dogs on them. Silver Creek Ranch was not for sale, would never be for sale, and she would appreciate it if he would stop wasting her time with his increasingly desperate proposals. As for his threats and innuendo, she had dealt with better men than him and come out ahead every time. Blackwood made one last attempt to salvage his position, turning to Tom with what he clearly thought was a reasonable proposition. Surely a sensible man could see that his employer was making a mistake that would ruin them both. If Tom would simply disappear, Blackwood would ensure that he was well compensated for his trouble. There were plenty of other ranches where a good cowhand could find work, places where he wouldn't be putting his life at risk by reaching above his station. Tom's response was swift and uncompromising. He told Blackwood that no amount of money could buy him away from Margaret, that he would rather die than leave her to face her troubles alone. As for reaching above his station, Tom had learned long ago that a man's worth was measured by his actions, not his bank account. He would rather be an honest cowhand married to a woman he loved than a rich man who had to buy his way through life. Faced with such determination from both Margaret and Tom, Blackwood finally began to retreat. But his parting words carried the promise of future trouble. He warned them that they had made powerful enemies, that the territory was not big enough to hide from the kind of influence he wielded. Margaret and her cowboy lover would rue the day they had crossed Harrison Blackwood, and when they came crawling back begging for mercy, he might not be feeling quite so generous. After Blackwood and his entourage departed, Margaret and Tom stood together in the suddenly quiet parlor, both shaken by the intensity of the confrontation, but also exhilarated by their public declaration of love. Margaret turned to Tom with tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. She had never had anyone stand up for her the way he had just done, never had anyone willing to risk everything simply to defend her honor. Tom gathered her into his arms, holding her close as they both processed what had just occurred. The die was cast now, their relationship no longer a secret, but a declared intention that would ripple throughout the territory. Margaret knew that Blackwood would make good on his threats, that their troubles were just beginning. But standing in Tom's strong embrace, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had chosen love over convention, courage over safety, and she had no regrets about that choice. The next few weeks proved that Blackwood's threats were not idle ones. Mysterious accidents began plaguing Silver Creek Ranch with increasing frequency. Fence lines were cut in the night, allowing cattle to wander onto neighboring properties where they had to be retrieved at considerable expense. Equipment broke down with suspicious regularity, often in ways that suggested sabotage rather than normal wear and tear. Several of Margaret's best ranch hands received offers of employment elsewhere, offers that were far too generous to refuse and clearly designed to weaken her operation. Most seriously, word came from Cheyenne that Margaret's primary beef contract with the territorial government was being reconsidered. Questions had been raised about the reliability of her operation, concerns that seemed to center around her personal conduct and its potential impact on her business judgment. The implication was clear: conform to conventional expectations or lose the contract that represented nearly 30% of her annual income. Margaret faced each challenge with characteristic determination, but the cumulative effect was wearing. She was fighting a war on multiple fronts, defending not only her ranch, but her right to choose her own path in life. Tom proved to be an invaluable ally in this struggle, his natural intelligence and frontier skills serving him well as he helped Margaret identify and counter the various threats to their operation. Together they worked to plug the holes in their defenses, but they both knew they were fighting a defensive battle against an enemy with deeper resources and longer reach. It was during this period of crisis that Tom made a discovery that would change everything. While checking the north pasture for signs of rustler activity, he came across a camp hidden in a stand of cottonwoods near the creek. The camp appeared to have been hastily abandoned, but the men who had occupied it had left behind enough evidence to paint a disturbing picture. Among the debris, Tom found correspondence that clearly linked the harassment of Silver Creek Ranch to Harrison Blackwood's syndicate. More importantly, Tom discovered that the threat to Margaret extended far beyond simple business pressure. The letters made reference to a plan to eliminate the problem permanently, using methods that would make Margaret's death appear accidental. The Eastern financiers had apparently decided that buying or bankrupting Silver Creek Ranch was taking too long, and they were prepared to resort to murder to achieve their goals. Tom raced back to the ranch house with his discovery, his heart pounding with fear for Margaret's safety. He found her in her study, working on the books as she did every evening, her auburn hair gleaming in the lamplight as she bent over the ledgers. For a moment he simply stood in the doorway, drinking in the sight of her, and thanking God that she was still safe. Then he stepped into the room and shared his terrible discovery. Margaret listened to Tom's report with growing alarm, her face paling as the full extent of the threat became clear. She had known that Blackwood was ruthless, but she had not imagined that he would resort to murder. The realization that her life was in immediate danger was sobering, but even more troubling was the knowledge that Tom and everyone else at Silver Creek Ranch were also at risk. By declaring their intention to marry, she had made Tom a target as well. They spent the evening planning their response to this new threat. Margaret's first instinct was to contact the territorial authorities, but Tom pointed out that Blackwood's influence might extend into those circles as well. They needed allies they could trust absolutely, people who would stand with them regardless of the consequences. Margaret began making a mental list of friends and business associates who might be willing to help, while Tom considered the defensive measures they could implement to protect the ranch. As they talked, a plan began to emerge. Rather than simply reacting to Blackwood's moves, they would take the offensive. Tom suggested that they gather more evidence of the syndicate's illegal activities, building a case that could be presented to federal authorities who would be beyond Blackwood's local influence. Meanwhile, Margaret would use her network of contacts to rally support from other independent ranchers who might be facing similar pressures. The plan was dangerous, requiring them to walk a fine line between gathering evidence and avoiding the fate that Blackwood had planned for them. But it also offered hope, a chance to not only save Silver Creek Ranch, but to strike a blow against the kind of economic tyranny that threatened the independence of the entire territory. Over the following days, Tom and Margaret worked together to implement their strategy. Tom used his skills as a tracker and his knowledge of the terrain to locate and monitor the syndicate's agents, while Margaret began reaching out to potential allies throughout the region. They were careful to vary their routines and never travel alone, aware that assassins might be watching for an opportunity to strike. Their caution proved justified when Tom discovered evidence of an ambush that had been prepared along Margaret's usual route to town. The would-be killers had positioned themselves in rocks overlooking a narrow canyon, clearly planning to make her death appear to be the result of an Indian attack or bandit raid. Only Tom's vigilance and the change in Margaret's travel patterns had prevented the plan from succeeding. The close call galvanized their efforts to gather evidence against Blackwood's syndicate. Tom began making night raids on the various camps and meeting places used by the hired gunmen, collecting letters, telegrams, and other documents that detailed the conspiracy against Silver Creek Ranch. It was dangerous work that required all of his frontier skills, but each successful raid brought them closer to having the proof they needed. Meanwhile, Margaret's efforts to build a coalition of independent ranchers began to bear fruit. She discovered that Silver Creek was not the only operation being targeted by Eastern syndicates. Similar pressure was being applied to ranchers throughout the territory, part of a coordinated effort to consolidate land ownership in the hands of a few wealthy investors. The realization that they were part of a larger pattern helped Margaret convince other ranchers to join forces in opposing the threat. The breakthrough came when Tom managed to intercept a telegram intended for one of Blackwood's lieutenants. The message contained detailed instructions for a final assault on Silver Creek Ranch, an attack that would eliminate both Margaret and Tom while making their deaths appear to be the result of a raid by hostile Indians. The plan was scheduled to take place during the upcoming cattle drive, when most of the ranch hands would be away from the main buildings. Armed with this intelligence, Margaret and Tom were able to prepare a counter-ambush that would turn the tables on their would-be assassins. They arranged for the cattle drive to proceed as scheduled, but secretly positioned trusted allies around the ranch buildings to await the attack. When Blackwood's hired killers arrived, they would find themselves facing a reception they had not anticipated. The confrontation took place on a moonless night in late September, when the autumn air carried the first hint of the winter to come. Margaret waited in her study, apparently unaware of the danger, while Tom and a dozen carefully chosen men lay hidden around the ranch house. The attackers came as expected, moving through the darkness with the confidence of men who believed their prey was helpless. The battle was brief but intense. Tom's men had the advantage of position and preparation, and they used it well. Within minutes, half the attackers were down, and the rest were in full retreat. Among the captured was the leader of the group, a professional gunman whose papers revealed the full extent of Blackwood's criminal conspiracy. With this evidence in hand, Margaret and Tom finally had what they needed to bring down Harrison Blackwood and his syndicate. Federal marshals were summoned from Denver, and within days, the entire conspiracy was unraveled. Blackwood himself was arrested while attempting to flee the territory, his dreams of a land empire collapsing around him like a house of cards. The victory was sweet, but it was not the end of Margaret and Tom's story. With the immediate threat removed, they were finally free to plan their future together, without the shadow of danger hanging over them. The wedding took place in early November, a simple ceremony held at Silver Creek Ranch with the entire community in attendance. Margaret wore her mother's wedding dress, a gown of ivory silk that had been carefully preserved for 30 years, while Tom donned a new black suit that he would treasure for the rest of his life. The ceremony was performed by the circuit preacher, a weathered man who had married more frontier couples than he could count. As Margaret and Tom exchanged vows beneath the vast Wyoming sky, with the wind singing through the cottonwoods and the cattle lowing in the distance, there was not a dry eye among the assembled guests. It was a love story that had captured the imagination of the entire territory, a tale of two people who had dared to follow their hearts despite the odds against them. The years that followed were ones of prosperity and happiness for the McKenna family, as they now called themselves. Tom proved to be as skilled at managing a ranch as he was at working cattle, and under their joint leadership, Silver Creek flourished as never before. They expanded their holdings, improved their breeding stock, and became one of the most respected operations in the territory. More importantly, they built a life together that was filled with love and mutual respect. Margaret had found in Tom a partner who appreciated her strength without trying to diminish it, while Tom had discovered in Margaret a woman who valued his contributions and encouraged his growth. Their marriage became a model for other frontier couples, proof that love could indeed conquer the barriers of class and convention. The harmonica that had brought them together remained a symbol of their love throughout their long marriage. Tom would play for Margaret in the evenings, just as he had during their courtship, and the sweet melodies would drift across Silver Creek Ranch like a benediction. Their children, when they came, would fall asleep to the sound of their father's music, and they would grow up knowing that true love was not just a fairy tale, but a reality that could be achieved by those brave enough to reach for it. As the 19th century drew to a close and the 20th began, the American West was changing rapidly. The frontier was becoming civilized, the open range was being fenced, and the old ways were giving ground to progress. But on Silver Creek Ranch, some things remained constant. The love between Margaret and Tom McKenna endured through all the changes, a testament to the power of two hearts that had found their perfect match. Visitors to the ranch would often comment on the obvious affection between the couple, the way they still looked at each other after decades of marriage as if they were newlyweds. When asked about the secret of their happiness, Tom would sometimes pull out his old harmonica and play a few bars of a love song, while Margaret would smile with the same radiance she had shown on their wedding day. The music, they would say, had brought them together, but it was their shared commitment to love and respect that had kept them together. The story of Margaret Whitmore and Tom McKenna became legend throughout Wyoming Territory and beyond. A tale told around campfires and in drawing rooms, in bunkhouses and boarding schools. It was a story that gave hope to lovers everywhere, proof that true love could overcome any obstacle if two people were willing to fight for it together. The wealthy cattle baroness and the harmonica-playing ranch hand had defied convention and found happiness, and their example inspired countless others to follow their hearts rather than society's expectations. So if you enjoyed this tale of love and courage on the American frontier, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our Histories of the Old West channel for more amazing stories from the days when the West was wild and anything seemed possible. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me about your favorite Old West love story, or share what you think made Margaret and Tom's relationship so special. Did you think Tom was brave to stand up to Harrison Blackwood, or should he have been more cautious about the danger he was putting Margaret in? Your thoughts and discussions make these historical tales come alive, so please join the conversation and let me know what frontier story you'd like to hear next.